The ships arrived without warning on a Tuesday morning. They were massive, elegant structures that seemed to bend light around their edges, making them shimmer like mirages in the black void of space. Earth's defense satellites detected them first, triggering alarms across every military installation on the planet. Within minutes, Captain Deho stood on the bridge of the UES Horizon's Edge, staring at the holographic display that showed 12 alien vessels, positioned in a perfect geometric pattern around Earth's orbit. "They're not attacking," his tactical officer reported, fingers dancing across her console. "No weapons charging, no aggressive positioning. They're just waiting." Deho felt his jaw tighten. Waiting was somehow worse than attacking. It meant these aliens had a plan, and they were confident enough to announce their presence without fear. He opened a channel to Earth Command and found Admiral Minho already on the line, his weathered face grim. "All ships maintain defensive positions," Minho ordered. "Do not fire unless fired upon. Let them make the first move." The first move came an hour later. The alien ships broadcast a message simultaneously across every communication frequency humanity possessed. The translation came through perfectly, as if they had studied human languages for years. Perhaps they had. People of Earth, the voice was neither male nor female, carrying an odd harmonic quality that made it sound like multiple voices speaking in unison. "We are the Velthran Accord, representatives of the oldest and most advanced civilizations in this galaxy. We have come to evaluate your species." In the United Earth Assembly Building, Commander Giwan sat among the gathered leaders of humanity. Watching the holographic projection of the alien spokesperson, the creature was tall and slender, with skin that shifted between blue and purple hues. Its eyes were too large to knowing, and when it looked directly at the camera, Giwan felt a chill run down her spine. "For 10,000 years, the Velthran continued, the Accord has maintained peace and prosperity across 200 star systems. We do this by carefully evaluating emerging species, determining which civilizations are ready to join the galactic community and which require containment." That word hung in the air like a threat. Containment, not destruction. But something perhaps worse. Imprisonment within their own solar system. Cut off from the stars, humanity had dreamed of reaching for generations. "Humanity has been observed," the alien said, and now its voice carried something that might have been disapproval. "Your history troubles us. War, exploitation, destruction of your own planet, oppression of your own people. These patterns suggest a dangerous species, one that could threaten galactic stability if allowed to expand unchecked across Earth." Billions of people watched the broadcast in their homes, on public screens, through neural interfaces. The reaction was immediate and visceral. Not fear, but anger. Humanity had fought so hard to move beyond its violent past. It spent centuries building a unified civilization based on cooperation rather than conflict. And now these aliens arrived with judgment already written on their faces. "However," the Velthran continued, "the Accord believes in fairness. You will be given the opportunity to prove yourselves worthy. 3 tests will be administered over the next 6 months. A military evaluation to assess your tactical capabilities. A diplomatic scenario to measure your moral reasoning. A cultural exchange to determine your capacity for empathy and growth." Juan stood up slowly, her mind already racing through possibilities. She was Earth's chief diplomatic strategist, and she knew manipulation when she heard it. These tests weren't about fairness. They were about control. "If you pass these evaluations," the alien said, "you will be welcomed into the Accord as a member species. If you fail, you will be placed under protective quarantine for your own good and the safety of the galaxy. You have 48 hours to respond. We await your decision." The transmission ended, leaving humanity in stunned silence. Admiral Minho called an emergency meeting of Earth's military command. Deho attended via holographic projection from his ship, along with dozens of other captains and commanders. The room buzzed with angry voices, officers demanding action, calling for immediate military response. "They can't just show up and demand we prove ourselves," one general shouted, slamming his fist on the table. "Who gave them the right to judge us?" "They did," Minho said quietly, and the room fell silent. They have the ships, the technology, and apparently 10,000 years of doing exactly this. The question isn't whether they have the right. The question is what we do about it. Juan spoke up from her position near the viewing screen. We need information. Everything they told us is designed to make us feel inferior, to accept their framework of judgment. But what do we actually know about the Velthrin Accord? What's their real history? How many other species have they evaluated? And most importantly, what happened to the ones who failed their tests? Deho nodded slowly. She's right. They're expecting us to either fight back immediately or beg for mercy. Both responses accept their premise that they're our superiors. What if we do neither? What are you suggesting? Minho asked. That we investigate them while they investigate us, Deho replied. They've studied humanity for who knows how long. Maybe it's time we returned the favor. Over the next 48 hours, Earth transformed. Scientists, historians, intelligence analysts, and cultural experts formed rapid response teams. They scoured every piece of data from deep space observations, every anomaly in ancient Earth transmissions, every whisper of alien activity that had been dismissed as coincidence. Dr. Yunji, director of the Exocultural Research Institute, barely slept as she coordinated the largest research effort in human history. When the deadline arrived, Giwan stood before the cameras, broadcasting humanity's response to the waiting Velthrin fleet. She wore the formal uniform of the diplomatic corps, her expression calm and professional. People of the Velthrin Accord, she began. Humanity acknowledges your message. We will participate in your evaluation process. However, we have a condition of our own. In orbit above Earth, aboard the Velthrin flagship, the Accord's commanders stirred with interest. Conditions were not part of the standard protocol. Emerging species were supposed to accept or reject the tests, not negotiate terms. While you evaluate us, Jiwan continued, her voice steady and clear, we will evaluate you. You claim to be the arbiters of galactic civilization, the judges of worthiness. Very well. Let us see what kind of civilization does the judging. Let us examine your history, your methods, your successes, and your failures. If we are to be measured, then it is only fair that we measure in return. She paused, letting the words sink in. You spoke of fairness, Velthrin Accord. Prove it. Allow us to study you as you study us. Share your records, your history, your dealings with other evaluated species. If you truly believe in the justice of your process, you have nothing to hide. The transmission ended. In the command center, Minho allowed himself a small smile. Bold move. It's the only move, Juan replied. They expected us to be defensive, to focus on proving we're not the monsters they think we are. Instead, we're asking the one question they probably never expected. Who made you the judges? Aboard the Horizon's Edge, Deho watched the Velthrin ships closely. For several minutes, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the alien vessels began transmitting data packets to Earth. Not everything humanity had requested, but something. Historical records, evaluation protocols, outcomes of previous tests. They're cooperating, his communications officer said, surprise evident in her voice. They actually sent the information. Deho studied the alien formations, noting how they maintained their perfect geometric pattern. These were beings who valued order, hierarchy, and precedent. They had a process, and that process had worked for 10,000 years. They were confident because they had never been challenged like this before. Forward everything to Dr. Yunji's team, Deho ordered, and tell them to look for what's not being said. The gaps in the records. The species that aren't mentioned anymore. The outcomes they don't want to talk about. As Earth's analysts began sorting through the Velthrin data, humanity prepared for the tests ahead. But something had shifted in those first 48 hours. The Accord had arrived expecting to find a primitive species, grateful for their attention, or a barbaric one that would confirm their prejudices. Instead, they found a civilization that looked them in the eye and demanded accountability. The tests were coming, but so was the truth. And in the cold mathematics of power and judgment, truth was about to become humanity's most dangerous weapon. Dr. Yunji had not left her laboratory in 3 days. Around her, dozens of screens displayed fragments of Velthrin history, cultural records, and evaluation reports. Her team worked in shifts, but she refused to rest. Every hour brought new discoveries, and each one was more disturbing than the last. "Look at this pattern," she said to her assistant, pointing at a timeline she had constructed. "The Accord evaluates a species. That species passes their tests. Then, 30 years later, that same species appears in Accord records as a labor force for mining operations or agricultural production, always in supporting roles, never as equals." Her assistant, a young man named Han, pulled up another set of files. "It gets worse. I've been tracking species that failed the evaluations. According to official records, they were placed under quarantine for their own protection. But here's the thing. After the quarantine begins, there's no more data. Nothing. It's like these civilizations just stop existing in any meaningful way." Youngji felt her stomach turn. She had suspected from the beginning that the AIO Accord's evaluation process was designed to maintain power rather than ensure galactic peace. But seeing the evidence laid out so clearly made her angry in a way she had not felt in years. "Send everything to Commander Jiwan," Yunji ordered. "She needs to see this before the diplomatic scenario begins." Across the city in the United Earth's diplomatic headquarters, Juan was already preparing for the next phase of the Accord's tests. The Velthrin had announced that the diplomatic evaluation would begin in 1 week. They would present humanity with a series of ethical dilemmas, scenarios designed to reveal the true nature of human moral reasoning. When Yunji's report arrived, Juan read it twice, then called an emergency meeting with Admiral Minho and Captain Deho. "They're not evaluating us to see if we're worthy," Juan said, pulling up Yunji's timeline on the conference room display. "They're evaluating us to find the best way to break us. Look at these diplomatic scenarios from past evaluations. They're not testing moral reasoning. They're testing obedience." Minho studied the data, his expression growing darker. "Every scenario presents only 2 choices. Submit to Accord authority or face consequences. There's never a third option, never room for negotiation or creative solutions. They're training species to accept that the Accord's word is final." Deho leaned forward, examining a particular case study, the Tarn species. 40 years ago, they were evaluated. They passed all 3 tests, including the diplomatic scenario. Now, look at where they are. Tarn citizens work in Accord factories. Tarn ships serve as transport vessels for Accord goods. Tarn children are educated in schools that teach them their culture was primitive before the Accord saved them. "It's not civilization they're offering," Juan said quietly. "It's colonization with better marketing." The realization hung in the air between them. Humanity had been preparing to prove themselves worthy of joining the galactic community. But there was no community to join. Only masters and servants, with the roles determined by whoever arrived first and built the biggest fleet. "So what do we do?" Minho asked. "We can't fight them directly. Their technology is centuries ahead of ours. Even if we somehow won a military confrontation, they'd just come back with more ships." Guan smiled, but there was no humor in it. "We do exactly what we've been doing. We hold up a mirror. If they want to judge us by our history, we'll judge them by theirs. And we'll make sure everyone watching sees what we find." Lieutenant Hyun, the young signals officer who had first cracked the Accord's archives, was about to make his most important discovery. Working late in his office aboard an orbital listening post, he noticed something strange in the pattern of Velthrin communications. The Accord wasn't just broadcasting to Earth, they were sending constant updates to dozens of other star systems. Maintaining contact with all their client species, those communications channels work both ways, Heian realized. If we can access them, we can broadcast to every species under Accord control. He brought his findings to Engineer Salmon, one of Earth's most brilliant technology specialists. Together, they devised a plan that was audacious in its simplicity. They would hijack the Accord's own communication network and use it to distribute everything humanity had learned about the Velthrin's true nature. "It's risky," Salmon warned. "The moment we start broadcasting, they'll know we've penetrated their systems. They might consider it an act of war. They'll already consider us beneath them," Hyun replied. "At least this way, we're fighting back on our terms." While Han and Soman prepared their broadcast, Captain Deho had another idea. He ordered every ship in the human fleet to undergo a radical modification. Their hull plating, normally designed to deflect energy weapons and absorb impacts, was replaced with highly reflective surfaces. The engineers thought he had lost his mind until he explained his plan. "The Velthrin are watching us constantly," Deho told his crew. "Every move we make, every communication we send, every decision our leaders make, they're studying us like specimens in a laboratory. So let's give them something to study. Let's show them their own reflection." Within days, the human fleet had transformed. Ships that were once matte gray and built for stealth now gleamed like mirrors, their surfaces capable of bouncing back not just light but sensor scans, communication signals, and surveillance attempts. When the Accord tried to monitor human military installations, they found themselves looking at their own monitoring equipment. The effect was both practical and psychological. Practically, it made humanity much harder to spy on. Psychologically, it sent a clear message. We see you seeing us. We're not afraid to look back. Commander Jiwan decided it was time to make their findings public. She scheduled a broadcast that would reach not just Earth, but thanks to Hoon and Summon's work, every corner of Accord space. The Velthrin tried to block the transmission, but human ingenuity had found pathways through their networks that even they did not know existed. "The people of the galaxy," Giwan began, her image appearing on screens across 200 star systems. "My name is Commander Giwan of Earth. 3 weeks ago, the Velthrin Accord arrived at my world to evaluate whether humanity deserves to join galactic civilization. They presented themselves as wise judges, as protectors of peace and order. They promised fairness." She paused, letting her words reach across the vast distances of space. In Accord client systems, people stopped their work to watch. This was unprecedented. No evaluated species had ever broadcast beyond their own system during the testing period. "But we investigated them as they investigated us," Giwan continued. "And what we found was not wisdom or fairness. We found a system designed to maintain power through psychological manipulation. We found species who passed every test and now serve as labor forces. We found civilizations that failed the tests and simply disappeared from history." On the main display behind her, Yunji's timeline appeared, showing decades of Accord evaluations and their outcomes. The data was undeniable, presented in simple graphs and charts that anyone could understand. The Tarn people, the Drellith, the Korvan, and dozens more. You were told you were being evaluated. You were told that passing the tests would make you equal members of galactic society. But that was never the plan. The plan was to break your spirit, to make you believe you needed the Accord's guidance, to turn you into willing servants, as in the Accord's flagship. The Velthrin commanders watched Jiwan's broadcast with growing alarm. This was not how evaluations were supposed to proceed. The humans were supposed to be focused on their own tests, on proving themselves worthy, not investigating and exposing Accord methods. "She's lying," one commander insisted. "The client species are protected and guided. They benefit from our wisdom." But even as he said it, reports began arriving from across Accord space. The Tarn were questioning their leadership. The Drellith were demanding access to their pre-valuation historical records. Seeds of doubt planted by humanity's broadcast were beginning to sprout. Guan's voice continued calm and steady. "I'm not telling you this to convince you to rebel. That's your choice and yours alone. I'm telling you this because you deserve to know the truth. The Accord doesn't want equals. They want subjects. And they've been very good at making species believe they deserve to be subjects." She looked directly into the camera and threw it at millions of viewers across the galaxy. "Earth will not submit to this system. We will not prove ourselves worthy by someone else's standards. We will not bow to judges who refuse to be judged themselves. And if that makes us dangerous in the Accord's eyes, so be it. We'd rather be dangerous and free than safe and enslaved." For several long moments, nothing happened. Then, from the Velthrin flagship, a new message arrived. The tone had changed completely. Gone was the condescending patience. In its place was barely controlled anger. Humanity has violated the terms of evaluation, the Velthrin spokesman declared. You have interfered with Accord internal communications. You have spread misinformation to client species. You have rejected the framework of judgment that has maintained galactic peace for 10 millennia. Admiral Minho watched the alien's furious face and felt a grim satisfaction. They had hit a nerve. The mask of benevolent wisdom had cracked, revealing the authoritarian reality beneath. The military evaluation has moved forward, the Velthrin continued. You have 48 hours to present your fleet for tactical assessment. Failure to comply will be considered an act of war against the Accord and all member species. The transmission cut off abruptly. Aboard the Horizon's Edge, Deho's tactical officer turned to him with worry evident on her face. Captain, they're serious. Their fleet is moving into attack formation. Deho nodded slowly, watching the reflective surfaces of his ship's hull shimmer in the starlight. They're scared. We held up a mirror, and they didn't like what they saw. Now they're going to try to break that mirror before anyone else gets a good look. He opened a channel to all human vessels. All ships, prepare for combat operations. But remember, we're not trying to defeat them. We're trying to teach them. Teach them that judgment flows both ways. Teach them that no one gets to be the arbiter of another civilization's worth. And most importantly, teach them that humanity doesn't ask permission to exist. The Kepler Belt had been chosen by the Velthrin as the testing ground for good reason. It was far enough from Earth to prevent collateral damage, close enough for humanity's fleet to reach without exhausting their fuel reserves. The Accord wanted a fair fight, or at least what they considered fair. In truth, they expected a massacre that would serve as a lesson to any other species watching. Captain Deho stood on the bridge of the Horizon's Edge, watching the Accord fleet take position. 12 massive warships, each one capable of destroying a city with a single shot. Against them, humanity had assembled 40 vessels, none larger than a cruiser. Most of them converted civilian ships hastily equipped with whatever weapons Earth's factories could produce in 3 weeks. They're forming a standard assault pattern, his tactical officer reported. Flagship in the center, heavy cruisers flanking, destroyers on the outer edges. It's textbook formation for overwhelming a weaker force. Deho smiled slightly. Textbook. That's their first mistake. They're assuming this will be a textbook battle. He opened a channel to the fleet. All ships, execute scatter pattern Delta. Remember, we're not here to trade shots with them. We're here to learn. The human fleet exploded outward like dandelion seeds in the wind. 40 ships, each traveling in a different direction, each accelerating at maximum burn. The Velthrin fleet hesitated for just a moment, confused by the retreat, then pursued. Their tactical doctrine was clear. Pursue, engage, destroy. That hesitation cost them. It gave humanity exactly what they needed. Time and distance to implement their real plan. Major Singhi commanded the Wraith Squadron. 12 small attack craft that were barely more than cockpits strapped to engines and sensor arrays. Her job was simple in concept, but terrifying in execution. She had to get close enough to the Accord ships to let them shoot at her, record every aspect of those weapons firing, and survive long enough to transmit the data back to the fleet. All Wraiths, break and engage, Sanghi ordered, her hands steady on the controls despite her racing heart. Remember, they need to think we're a genuine threat. Make them work for it. Her squadron dove toward the nearest Accord destroyer, weaving through space in patterns designed to be unpredictable. The destroyer's weapon systems tracked them, calculated firing solutions, and opened fire. Beams of energy sliced through the void, missing the small human craft by meters. But missing was part of the plan. Every shot the Accord fired, every targeting calculation they made, every adjustment their systems performed was recorded in perfect detail by Sanghi's sensor packages. Within minutes, Earth's analysts had more data on Velthrin weapons than the Accord had collected on human technology in months of observation. Wraith 3 is hit, one of her pilots called out. Engine damage. Losing power. Wraith 3, eject your data core and evacuate, Sanghi ordered. The rest of you, pattern shift to Gamma. Keep them guessing. The Accord destroyer destroyed Wraith 3 moments after the pilot ejected. The Velthrin commanders marked it as a kill, a small victory in what they assumed would be a decisive battle. They did not know that Ray 3's entire purpose had been to collect data, and that mission had been accomplished before the ship was destroyed. Across the Kepler belt, the same scene played out 40 times. Human ships engaged briefly, recorded everything, and either fled or were destroyed. To the Velthran, it looked like panic, like a weaker force being systematically eliminated. They did not realize they were being studied. Dr. Taiyang watched the data stream into Earth's Central Military Research Facility. Every accord, weapons signature, every shield modulation, every communication protocol was being fed into humanity's most advanced computers. Machine learning algorithms designed for economic modeling were repurposed to find patterns in Velthran tactics. Within hours, those computers began providing answers. Their shield systems rotate frequencies every 15 seconds, Taiyang reported to Admiral Minho. It's a good defense against sustained bombardment, but there's a 3-millisecond gap during the rotation. That's our window. 3 milliseconds? Minho asked. That's not much time. It's enough, Taiyang replied. If we know exactly when the rotation will occur, and now we do. He pulled up another analysis. Their formation doctrine is rigid. They maintain specific distances between ships to maximize overlapping fields of fire. But that rigidity is also a weakness. If we can force them to break formation, they lose coordination. Engineer Salman had been working on another aspect of the problem. While the Accord was focused on the military engagement, she had been analyzing their communication patterns. The Velthran fleet maintained constant contact with each command ship. Relaying orders and tactical updates in real time can jam their command frequency, Salman told Deho during a brief lull in the fighting, but only for about 30 seconds before their systems adapt. We need to make those 30 seconds count. Deho looked at the tactical display, watching the Accord fleet pursue scattered human vessels across the belt. An idea formed in his mind, audacious and dangerous, but possibly brilliant. What if we don't jam them? Deho asked. What if we feed them false data instead? Make them think their sensors are detecting human ships where there aren't any? Summon's eyes widened. Holographic projections. We'd need to generate hundreds of false targets to make it convincing. Can you do it? Give me 6 hours and every spare power cell in the fleet, Salman replied. Yes, I can do it. The Accord fleet had destroyed or disabled 15 human vessels when Deho gave the order to implement Phase 2 of humanity's plan. The remaining 25 ships, battered and scattered, began moving toward a rally point deep in the asteroid field. The Velthran pursued eagerly, sensing final victory. Then Salman activated her holographic projectors. Suddenly, the Accord sensors detected not 25 human ships, but 300. They appeared from behind asteroids, from empty space, from impossible angles. Each one registered as a valid target on Velthran detection systems. It's a trick, the Accord fleet commander growled. Ignore the false readings and focus on confirmed targets. But which targets were confirmed? The holographic ships moved, accelerated, and even fired simulated weapons. They matched human tactics and ship signatures perfectly. For every real human vessel, there were now a dozen false ones. And the Accord's targeting computers couldn't tell the difference. Lieutenant Hayon, monitoring Accord communications, watched their command network descend into chaos. Captains were calling for instructions. Tactical officers were reporting conflicting sensor data. The rigid hierarchy that made the Accord so effective in straightforward battles became a liability when faced with confusion and uncertainty. They're paralyzed, Hayon reported. They keep asking their flagship for orders, but the flagship doesn't know what orders to give. Deho saw his moment. All ships, weapons free. Target their sensor arrays and communication relays. We're not trying to destroy them. We're trying to blind and deafen them. The real human vessels emerged from the swarm of holograms, firing not at the Accord hulls but at their sensor pods and communication arrays. Precision strikes that required no heavy weapons, just accuracy and timing. The 3-millisecond gaps in their shield rotations became highways for human weapons. Major. Sang led her reform squadron in a daring attack on the Accord flagship itself. The massive vessel's sensors were overwhelmed by false targets, its crew confused by conflicting reports. She guided her fighters through a gap in their defensive formation and launched a full spread of missiles at the flagship's primary communication array. The missiles struck home. The Accord flagship went silent, cut off from its fleet. Without coordination from their command ship, the other Velthran vessels fell back on autonomous combat protocols. But those protocols were designed for ship-to-ship combat, not for fighting an enemy that appeared to be everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. "Ceasefire," Deho ordered suddenly. The human fleet stopped shooting, pulled back, and allowed the holographic projections to fade. The Accord found themselves surrounded by empty space, their sensors damaged, their communications disrupted, and their flagship humiliated. A new transmission came from the Velthran fleet, but this time not from the flagship. A destroyer captain, speaking without authority from higher command, requested a ceasefire to recover damaged vessels and tend to wounded crew. Admiral Minho granted it immediately. "We're not here to slaughter you," he broadcast to the Accord fleet. "We're here to teach you a lesson. You came to test our tactics, our capabilities, our worthiness to join your civilization. Instead, you learned that evaluation goes both ways, aboard the horizon's edge." Deho watched the Accord fleet begin a slow withdrawal from the Kepler belt. They had not been defeated in the traditional sense. Their ships were still functional, their weapons still operational. But they had been outmaneuvered, outsmarted, most damagingly to their pride, humiliated by a species they considered primitive. Commander Juwan's voice came through on a priority channel. "Deho, you need to see this. We're getting messages from outside the solar system. Covert channels, highly encrypted." "From who?" Deho asked. "From the Tarn and the Drellith. They watched the battle. They saw what you did, and they want to know how." Across Accord space, something unprecedented was happening. Species that had accepted their subordinate status for decades were asking questions. If humanity could challenge the Accord and survive, what did that mean for them? If the Velthran's military superiority could be overcome through cleverness rather than raw power, were they really as invincible as they claimed? Dr. Yunji received a message from a Tarn historian asking for access to humanity's research on Accord evaluation methods. Lieutenant Hayon was contacted by a Drellith communications officer who wanted to learn about penetrating Accord networks. Engineer Soman found herself explaining. Holographic projection technology to engineers from 3 different species. The seeds of rebellion that Juwan had planted with her broadcast were beginning to sprout. In the Accord, for the first time in their 10,000-year history, felt the ground shifting beneath them, in the temporary command center established on a Kepler belt asteroid. Admiral Minho gathered his senior officers. "They're going to come back harder next time. The military evaluation isn't over. They'll adapt to our tactics, patch their vulnerabilities, and try again." "Let them," Deho said quietly. "Every time they adapt to us, they reveal more about how they think. And every time we survive another encounter, more of their client species start believing that resistance is possible." Minho nodded slowly. "We're not fighting a war for survival anymore. We're fighting a war of ideas. Showing the galaxy that the Accord's authority isn't absolute, that's more dangerous to them than any weapon we could build." "Then we keep pushing," Juwan said, joining the meeting via holographic projection. "The military evaluation was never really about testing our capabilities. It was about breaking our will to resist. They failed. Now we show them what happens when a species refuses to be broken." The Velthran Accord's Emergency Council had not met in person for 3 centuries. They governed their empire through holographic conferences and algorithmic decision-making systems. Efficient and emotionless. But efficiency was failing them now. The emotions they thought they had evolved beyond were creeping back into their deliberations. Fear, primarily, and anger at whoever had made them afraid. "The humans must be contained," one council member insisted, her purple skin darkening with agitation. "They're spreading dangerous ideas across our client systems. The Tarn are openly questioning their integration agreements. The Drellth are requesting historical records we sealed decades ago. If we don't act decisively, the entire structure could collapse. Another council member brought up holographic displays showing unrest across Accord space. Protests on Tarn colonies, work stoppages in Drellith industrial centers, academic conferences where subject species were discussing concepts like autonomy and self-determination, words that hadn't been spoken openly in Accord space for generations. It's not just the ideas, a military commander reported. It's the methods. The humans are sharing their tactical analysis with anyone who asks. They're teaching other species how to identify weaknesses in our systems. 3 days ago, a Tarn freighter used a modified version of humanity's holographic technology to evade one of our patrol ships. They're learning from the humans' example. The Council's eldest member, a Velthrin, who remembered the early days of the Accord's expansion, spoke with the weight of centuries behind his words. We created this situation. We became arrogant. We believed our evaluation system was perfect because it had never been challenged successfully. The humans didn't just challenge it. They exposed it. They held up a mirror and showed the galaxy what we really are.
And what are we?
Another council member asked defensively. We brought peace to 200 systems. We ended wars, guided primitive species to civilization, created an empire that has lasted 10,000 years. An empire built on broken spirits, the eldest replied. The humans are right about that, at least. We don't evaluate species to see if they're worthy. We evaluate them to find the most effective way to subordinate them. And now that truth is spreading faster than we can contain it. Back on Earth, Dr. Yunji barely recognized her research facility anymore. What had started as a small team investigating the Accord had grown into a massive operation, coordinating with resistance movements across the galaxy. Her office was filled with holographic displays, showing real-time updates from a dozen different star systems. A Tarn engineer named Bora contacted her with a question about accessing sealed historical archives. Yunji walked her through the process, using techniques Lieutenant Hyan had developed. When Bora successfully retrieved records showing what Tarn society had been like before the Accord's evaluation, she went silent for a long moment. We had our own literature, Bora said finally, her voice tight with emotion. Our own art, our own philosophy. The Accord told us we were primitive, that our culture was worthless before they civilized us. But these records show a rich, complex civilization. They didn't save us. They erased us. I'm sorry, Yunji said quietly. But now you know the truth. What you do with that knowledge is up to you. Bora's expression hardened. We were taught that resisting the Accord was futile, that their technology was too advanced. But you showed us otherwise. If humanity can fight back and survive, so can we. Similar conversations were happening across Accord space. Engineer Soman found herself leading technical workshops for species who wanted to understand human defensive technologies. Major Sangi's tactical analysis of the Kepler belt. Battle was being studied in secret by military officers from half a dozen client species. Humanity wasn't building an alliance. They were lighting fires that the Accord couldn't put out fast enough. The Accord's response was swift and brutal. They declared humanity a hostile contaminating influence and assembled the largest fleet in their history. 200 warships pulled from garrison posts across the Empire gathered at the edge of Sol system. The message was clear: submit completely or be destroyed. Admiral Minho watched the gathering armada on his displays and felt the weight of every decision he had ever made. This was no longer about passing or failing in evaluation. This was existential. If the Accord won here, they would make an example of humanity that would terrify the galaxy into submission for another 10,000 years. They're not just coming for us, Commander Giwan observed. They're coming to prove to their client species that resistance is futile. If they can crush humanity after everything we've accomplished, it sends a message that no one can escape their control.
Oh.
Then we need to send a different message, Deho said. He had been studying reports from Lieutenant Hayon about the Accord fleet positions. Look at where they pulled these ships from. Tarn space is down to minimal garrison forces. The Drell systems have half their normal patrol ships. They're so focused on us that they've left their own territory vulnerable. Minho turned to look at him sharply. You're suggesting we abandon Earth's defense to attack their territory. Not attack, Deho corrected. Support. The Tarn have been preparing for resistance. So have the Drellith. They're just waiting for a sign that they're not alone in this fight. What if we showed them they aren't? It was the most audacious gambit any of them could imagine. With the largest enemy fleet in galactic history positioned to attack Earth, humanity would split its forces and send ships away from the Sol system. It violated every principle of defensive warfare. It was tactically insane. Guan smiled. It's also exactly what the Accord wouldn't expect. They think we're cornered, desperate, focused only on survival. Instead, we go on the offensive. Not against them directly, but in support of others who want to be free. The decision was made. Half of Earth's fleet, led by Captain Deho, would depart Sol system and head for Tarn and Drellith space. The other half, under Admiral Minho's direct command, would defend Earth against the coming assault. If this works, Minho said quietly, we start a galactic revolution. If it fails, we lose everything. We already lost everything the moment the Accord showed up, Deho replied. They were never going to let us be free. At least this way, we fight for something bigger than just ourselves. The human fleet split. Half remained in defensive positions around Earth, preparing for the coming battle. The other half jumped to faster-than-light travel, carrying not just weapons, but hope to species who had lived under Accord control for generations. When Deho's fleet arrived at Tarn space, they found a civilization on the edge of revolution. The Tarn had discovered the truth about their history, learned that their culture had been systematically erased and replaced with Accord-approved narratives. They were angry, organized, and ready to fight. They just needed someone to stand beside them, says Captain Deho of Earth. He broadcasts to the Tarn resistance. We're here not as leaders or conquerors, but as allies. Your fight for freedom is your own, but you don't have to fight alone. The Tarn uprising began within hours, coordinated across multiple star systems, carefully planned through covert channels that Heian had helped them establish. They seized Accord administrative centers, took control of communication hubs, and declared independence. When Accord garrison forces moved to suppress the rebellion, they found human ships blocking their path. The human vessels didn't engage in direct combat. They didn't have to. Their presence alone changed the calculation. Accord commanders had orders to maintain control of client systems, but not at the cost of fighting another war with humanity. They hesitated, called for reinforcements, and waited for instructions from the Council. By the time those instructions arrived, the Drellith had begun their own uprising, then the Korvan. Then 3 more species whose names most humans had never heard. Like dominoes falling, the Accord's carefully constructed empire began to crack at Earth. The massive Accord fleet prepared for attack, but reports kept arriving from across their territory. Rebellions, uprisings, client species declaring independence. The fleet's commanders found themselves in an impossible position. They could destroy Earth, but in doing so, they would commit their forces to a battle while their empire burned behind them. Admiral Minho broadcast a message to the Accord fleet. You came here to make an example of humanity, to show the galaxy what happens to species who refuse to submit, but you're too late. The galaxy is already watching, and what they see is your empire falling apart. He pulled up displays showing the uprisings across Accord space. These aren't human rebellions. We didn't start these fights. We just showed people it was possible to win them. Every species you're losing right now made their own choice. They chose freedom over security. They chose dignity over subordination. And you can't stop them all. For the first time in their history, the Veltherin Accord faced a crisis they couldn't solve with military force or careful manipulation. Their evaluation system, their power structure, their entire civilization was built on the premise that they were the wise judges and everyone else was a subject waiting to be elevated or contained. Humanity had shattered that premise, and now the consequences were cascading across the galaxy. Commander G1 opened a direct channel to the Accord Council. You have a choice. You can attack Earth and win a single battle while losing your empire. Or you can withdraw, accept that your days of judging other species are over, and try to negotiate a new relationship with the civilizations you've controlled for so long. "We don't negotiate with subordinate species," one council member replied. But his voice lacked conviction. "Then you'll lose everything," Juan said simply. "Because we're not subordinate species anymore. Not the Tarn, not the Drellith, not any of the civilizations rising up right now. And definitely not humanity. We're free people, and we're teaching the galaxy what that means." The Accord fleet held its position for 3 more days, weapons armed, ready to attack. But no attack came. Reports from their territory grew worse by the hour. More uprisings. More systems declaring independence. More evidence that the Empire was collapsing from within. Finally, the fleet withdrew. Not in defeat, but in confusion and uncertainty. They needed to deal with the fires burning across their territory before they could focus on punishing humanity. It wasn't peace. It wasn't victory. But it was a reprieve. Aboard the Horizon's Edge, Deho watched Accord ships jumping away from Tarn space. The Tarn had won their freedom, not because humanity fought for them, but because humanity showed them how to fight for themselves. What happens now? His tactical officer asked. Deho thought about all the species waking up across the galaxy, realizing they didn't have to accept the Accord's judgment. Now comes the hard part, helping build something better than what we tore down. The standoff at Sol System lasted 3 weeks, but the real transformation happened across the galaxy during those 21 days. Every day brought news of another species declaring independence from the Accord. Some transitions were peaceful, with local Velthran administrators simply leaving when it became clear they had no support. Others were violent, with years of accumulated resentment exploding into conflict. Commander Giwan barely slept during this period. Her role had evolved from Earth's diplomatic strategist to something like an interstellar mediator. She spent her days on holographic conferences with newly independent governments, helping them navigate the chaos of sudden freedom. The Tarn needed help establishing provisional governance. The Drelth were negotiating with Accord forces that wanted to surrender rather than fight. The Corvin were dealing with internal divisions about what independence should look like. "We can't solve all their problems," Admiral Minho warned her during one of their brief strategy meetings. "We're not equipped to run a galactic social services program." "We're not solving their problems," Juwan replied, rubbing her tired eyes. "We're helping them solve their own problems. There's a difference. The Accord used to tell everyone how to live, what to think, how to organize their societies. We're doing the opposite, giving them the space and support to figure it out themselves." Dr. Taiyang's team was working on a different kind of challenge. Many of the liberated species had been psychologically conditioned by the Accord's evaluation system to believe they were inferior, that they needed guidance from their superiors. Generations of propaganda had convinced them that their own cultures were primitive and their own instincts were untrustworthy. "It's deeper than we thought," Taiyang explained to Yunji during a research review. The Accord didn't just control these species politically. They controlled how they thought about themselves. Tarn children were taught that pre-Accord Tarn society was barbaric. Drellith students learned that their ancestors were backwards and ignorant. Undoing that psychological damage will take decades. "But it can be undone?" Yenji asked. "Yes," Taiyang said firmly. "It starts with truth. Showing people their real history, their actual accomplishments before the Accord arrived. That's what you've been doing with the archives. Keep doing it." Captain Deho and Major Sengi were leading a different kind of mission. Several newly independent species were being threatened by hardline Accord forces who refused to accept the Empire's collapse. These Velthran loyalists had declared that they would rather destroy civilizations than see them leave Accord control. "We're evacuating 3 million Corvin civilians from the outer colonies," Sang reported during a fleet briefing. "Accord loyalists are threatening to bombard their settlements if they don't submit. We need more ships." Every available human vessel was redirected to evacuation efforts. Civilian transports, cargo haulers, even private yachts volunteered to help. The human fleet that had fought so cleverly in the Kepler Belt was now racing across the galaxy to save lives. Lieutenant Bora, the Tarn engineer who had first reached out to Dr. Yunji, now commanded a mixed fleet of Tarn and human ships. Together, they protected supply convoys carrying food and medical supplies to species whose infrastructure had collapsed in the chaos of independence. She worked alongside Lieutenant Heian, who had helped establish the communication networks that kept the newly independent worlds connected. Strange how this worked out, Bora said to Heian during one of their coordination meetings. A few months ago, we were strangers from different worlds. Now we're partners in the most important project any of us will ever work on. Building something better than what came before, Heian agreed. The Accord promised order and peace, but it was the peace of a prison. What we're building might be messier, but at least it's real. The idea for the Free Worlds Assembly came from an unexpected source. A group of Drellith philosophers who had been studying human political history proposed creating a governing structure based on voluntary cooperation rather than hierarchical control. Commander G1 helped refine their proposal, drawing on Earth's own long struggle to create functional democratic institutions. Every species gets one vote, Juan explained to the provisional government's gathering for the first assembly meeting. Not based on military power, not based on economic strength, not based on how long you've been spacefaring. One species, one vote. All equal. The Accord will say, "We're naive," a Tarn representative pointed out. They'll claim this kind of equality is impossible, that someone always needs to be in charge. Then let them say it, Juan replied. We're not building this system to prove anything to the Accord. We're building it because we believe every civilization has the right to determine its own future. If that's naive, I'll happily be naive. The first Free Worlds Assembly meeting was held on a neutral space station, jointly constructed by 8 formerly subject species. Captain Deho, now serving as Earth's ambassador, stood alongside representatives from DOS. Inus of Worlds. The contrast with the Accord's rigid hierarchy was stark. Here, a recently spacefaring species had the same voice as civilizations that had been traveling the stars for centuries. The Assembly's founding charter took 3 weeks to draft. Every clause was debated, every word carefully chosen. The core principles were simple, but revolutionary. No species has the right to judge another's worthiness to exist. All civilizations are equal regardless of technological advancement, and cooperation must be voluntary, never coerced. This charter says that no member can claim authority to evaluate other civilizations. Engineer Soman noted, reading through the draft. That's aimed directly at the Accord's entire system. It's aimed at preventing anyone from ever creating that system again, Giwan corrected. Including us. We're not the galaxy's liberators. We're one species among many, trying to build something better together. Dr. Yunji established what she called the Cultural Preservation Institute, with branches on every member world. Its mission was to recover and document the histories and traditions that the Accord had tried to erase. Tarn artists were rediscovering ancient forms of music their grandparents had been forbidden to play. Drellith writers were publishing literature in languages that had been banned for decades. Corvin philosophers were teaching ideas that the Accord had declared dangerous. This is what they were really afraid of, Yunji said during the Institute's inauguration. Not our weapons or our tactics. Our diversity. Every species has unique perspectives, unique wisdom, unique ways of understanding the universe. The Accord wanted conformity because diversity is harder to control. We're choosing diversity because it makes us stronger, not weaker. The Velthrin Accord didn't disappear entirely. Some Velthrin colonies, realizing they couldn't maintain their empire, chose to join the Free Worlds Assembly as equal members. They brought valuable technology and knowledge, contributing to the new civilization rather than trying to control it. Other Velthrin groups retreated into isolation, bitter about their loss of power, but lacking the military strength to reclaim it. A few Accord leaders faced justice for their crimes, not show trials or revenge, but actual legal proceedings where formerly subject species presented evidence of cultural genocide, forced labor, and systematic psychological abuse. The trials were difficult, painful, and necessary. They established that even powerful civilizations could be held accountable for their actions. Commander Jawan, in one of her last acts before retiring, helped draft what became known as the Mirror Accords. These were principles for first contact situations, designed to prevent any future civilization from claiming the right to judge others. The central idea was simple. If you claim the right to evaluate another species, You must submit to the same evaluation yourself. The Accord came to Earth expecting to judge us, Jiwan explained in her final speech to the assembly. Instead, we held up a mirror and forced them to see themselves. That mirror saved us, and it can save future civilizations too. No one gets to be the judge unless they're willing to be judged by the same standards. Admiral Minho retired 6 months after the Assembly's founding, replaced by a younger officer who had never known a galaxy dominated by the Accord. Before he left, he recorded a message for Earth's military academy, reflecting on the conflict that had changed everything. "We didn't win through superior firepower," Minho said in the recording. "We won by refusing to accept the Accord's premise. They wanted to test us, to judge us, to determine if we were worthy. We said no. We said that no one has the right to judge another civilization's worth." That idea, that simple refusal, changed the galaxy more than any weapon could have. 50 years passed. The Free World's Assembly grew to include over 100 member species. The galaxy was not perfect. There were disputes, conflicts, challenges that seemed insurmountable. But they were solved through negotiation, compromise, cooperation rather than through imposed authority from above. Earth was no longer the brave rebel that had defied an empire. It was one voice among many in a civilization built on equality and mutual respect. Captain Deho's legacy lived on, not through statues or monuments, but through the simple fact that no species anywhere claimed the right to judge another. When a new species called the Karathi entered the galactic stage, they were nervous. They had observed the assembly from afar, watching and learning, but they were uncertain about how they would be received. Their technology was primitive by galactic standards. Their culture was strange and unfamiliar. Would they be evaluated? Would they be judged? Ambassador Jae-soon, who had studied under Daeho and Jawan, led the first contact mission. He was young by diplomatic standards, but he understood the principles that had founded the assembly. When his ship approached the Karathi homeworld, he broadcast a simple message. "People of Karathi, we are the Free World's Assembly. We come not to judge you or evaluate you, but to meet you as equals. You don't need to prove anything to us. You exist, therefore you matter. Your culture, your knowledge, your perspective on the universe are valuable simply because they're yours. When you're ready, if you're ready, we'd be honored to exchange knowledge and friendship with you. No tests, no evaluations. Just equals meeting, equals." The Karathi representative stared at the transmission in disbelief. "No tests?" she asked. "No judgment? How do you know if we're worthy?" Jae-sung smiled, thinking of all the history that led to this moment. Worthiness isn't something you prove to others. It's something you decide for yourself. We learned that lesson the hard way, from a species called humanity. They were once evaluated by an empire that claimed the right to judge. Instead of submitting, they held up a mirror and asked, "Who judges the judges?" He gestured to the diverse fleet behind him, ships from dozens of species all working together. This is what we built from that question. Not an empire. Not a hierarchy. Just free civilizations choosing to cooperate. If you want to join us, you're welcome. If you want to stay independent, we'll respect that too. The choice is yours, as it should be. The Karathi took their time, as was their right. They studied the assembly, asked questions, learned about its history. Eventually, they chose to join. But it was their choice, made freely, without coercion or manipulation. That's what made it meaningful. In Earth's historical archives, as carefully preserved, was Commander Giwan's final log entry from the days of the Accord crisis. New students at the Diplomatic Academy read it as part of their training, learning about the principles that founded their civilization. They sought to test humanity, Giwan had written. They wanted to judge whether we deserved a place among the stars. We could have tried to pass their tests, to prove ourselves by their standards. Instead, we held up a mirror. We showed them that judgment flows both ways, that no one has the inherent right to evaluate another's worth. That simple act of defiance changed everything. Not just for humanity, but for every species that had ever bowed to authority they didn't choose. She had concluded with words that became the unofficial motto of the Free World's Assembly. Freedom isn't something you earn from judges. It's something you defend together. That's not just a principle of warfare. It's a principle of civilization, and it's worth fighting for. Always. The age of evaluation was over. The age of cooperation had begun. And humanity, the species that had once been declared too dangerous to join galactic civilization, had helped build something better than any empire could imagine. Not through conquest or domination, but through a simple, revolutionary idea that all beings have the right to define themselves, and no one gets to be the judge of another's worth. In the vastness of space, on 100 different worlds, species once broken by the Accord's psychological warfare were rediscovering themselves. Children learned their true histories. Artists created work in long band styles. Philosophers questioned ideas that had once been forbidden. And everywhere people looked at the stars, not with the fear of judgment, but with the hope of meeting equals. The mere humanity had held up to the Accord reflected more than just their hypocrisy. It reflected a truth that changed the galaxy. Freedom is not a gift granted by the powerful. It's a right claimed by the brave. And once claimed, it transforms everything it touches. The story of humanity's first contact would be told for generations, not as a tale of military victory, but as a lesson in the power of refusing to accept another's judgment. They sought to test humanity. Humans held up a mirror, and in that reflection, the entire galaxy saw itself clearly for the first time.